We're just at the end of a legislative session and kind of in the middle of a school year, and there is still a lot of conversation happening around long-term fallout from COVID. And I want to start right with that because there was a New York Times story this week that talked about what the data show. And the takeaway was that, then this is quoting from the story, "Today there is broad acknowledgement among many public health and education experts that extended school closures did not significantly stop the spread of COVID, while the academic harms for children have been large and long-lasting." I'd like you to address that. Do you agree with that assessment?
For the most part, I do. I think there's two parts there. The presumption that it didn't stop the spread, obviously keeping schools remote a little longer in our state till we had a vaccine kept a lot of people from getting COVID and the spread of it. So I think epidemiology, I'll leave it to them to determine what would have happened had we gone back faster. We certainly saw higher case rates and higher mortality rates in states that went back to school faster. So I'll leave that to them. My bailiwick is education. There's no question there's long-lasting impacts of the pandemic for lots of aspects of our lives, not to mention kids. So we saw test scores go down. We saw that sense of isolation. There's no doubt about that. It's part of the reason the federal government and our state has invested. We've seen great recovery, but not to pre-pandemic levels yet. But we see those math scores really coming up, those language scores coming up, and a host of other things, including student mental health. They're reporting that they feel better. So it's definitely had impacts. There's no question about that. I think for all of us is anytime you have something that massive, global wars, pandemic that we had 100 years ago, the Civil War, like when you think about these massive societal impacts, the hopefulness is that we do get through them and we do recover and we're stronger for them. But for a period of time, it's impactful. And we've had to really invest in kids. We've used federal dollars to do that. We're seeing a good recovery, but there's a ways to go here on that.
We don't need to litigate this too much, but there are parents I have spoken to. There was a point at which there were some who thought, we shouldn't close schools altogether. There were others who thought it made sense for a time, and then they reached a point where they thought the schools should reopen more quickly, and they did not. I heard one parent I talked to this week said, "I want to hear a mea culpa. I want to hear somebody say, yeah, we didn't call that right." I've heard others just say, let's acknowledge, and you just have, but how much of a toll this took. Is there any Monday morning quarterbacking to be done here? Any acknowledgement that maybe those closures lasted too long?
I don't think so, because at the time you don't know all the science. We didn't know whether there'd be more iterations. People have to remember it wasn't just the first wave that we got in, I think it was December of 19 or January of 20. We had subsequent waves that were even bigger than the previous ones, and we were racking up 1 million lost lives in this country, and mostly of seniors and elderly, but we didn't know whether this thing would continue to mutate. And so the default when you're dealing with children is, how do you do the least amount of harm, particularly a physical health standpoint? So until we got that vaccine, until it was ubiquitous in our society, the default, I think, for the governor, who ultimately made the decision, but I supported, was let's make sure that we keep the health of children and communities first and foremost. And so it's easy to look back on any pandemic and say, well, it turns out that particular virus impacted this society more than others. In the moment, you don't know that. And the default is protect kids, protect elderly. That's what we did. And now we have to work hard on recovery, which we're doing.
You can check out the rest of the show by clicking on the link below or by watching Inside Olympia Thursday evenings at 7 and 10.